First, when looking at migration, we need to look at some trends. Look at the net migration rate. So to do that, we go to the international database. We go down to the bottom. We see the migration part of the demographic overview, the demographic indicators, and we can see some patterns. So we look at first off at China. China has -0 in terms of the net migration rate. That just means a negative number just means more people are leaving than coming. In terms of the raw number, we can do that by looking at the net number of migrants, and keep in mind that's in thousands. So, for example, in 2016, 604,000 more people left China than came to China. So what that also shows is more than just 604,000 people left. That's just saying that there's just more, 604,000 more that left than came in. Because we do know that people are migrating to China as well. So looking at the chart, we can also start making some comparisons. What do we see in other countries, or other case study countries? In the case of Japan, we also see a negative net migration rate. However, 2015, 2016, 2025 projected, we do see a positive number. Now it's still 0. I realize that. But notice no longer do you have that -0. So it's a very small positive net migration rate. And so what's happening in Japan are there some changes. They are starting to slowly open up a migration policy. I'll come back to that idea. Now let's go to North Korea. North Korea, another country in which you do see a lot of outmigration very consistently. So -1 means that there's -1,000 more people more people leaving than coming. So not a lot of migration happening at all in North Korea. That largely relates to its isolationism. Go to South Korea, and here we see a much different pattern than the other 3 countries. Now, we do see a negative net migration rate. So, historically, South Korea was behaving like its other East Asian neighbors in terms of having more people leaving the country than coming. However, things have changed big time. We look at 2015 projections going forward, a huge increase in migration. Now that we've identified some migration trends historically, at the moment, and going forward in these East Asian countries, let's look at some flows. Let's look at, okay, what are some particular patterns of migration? Where are certain countries in which there are source areas for in-migrants, and what are some destinations for a lot of the out-migrants? And to do that, we're going to go to the World Migration Map. And so this will answer part B of the country profile assignment for this particular question. So here we have the World Migration Map. And so what we have is we have these dots and all these flows, proportional symbol maps. And essentially what we got is the red and blue circles. If you see a red circle, that means the country has a negative net migration. If it's a blue circle, it's a positive net migration. So we go over to Asia. This is before we're even looking at specific flows. This makes sense. Once again, we just showed that Japan, North Korea, and China have a net migration that's negative or barely 0. When we look at South Korea, extremely positive. So to go and to try to understand specific migration flows for certain countries, go ahead and click on the countries dot. So we'll go ahead and start with North Korea. And as you can tell, North Korea, not much going on. Just if you want a quick reminder, refresher as far as what do the dots mean, click the About the Map part and it'll tell you what it means. But I'm going to go ahead and explain it right now. So what this means is if it's a red dot, that means for that country. So for China, it has a negative net migration flow with North Korea. What that essentially means is in China, there are more people going to North Korea than North Koreans going to China. Now, some of that's this is based on UN population data. There's a lot of legal immigration from North Koreans wanting to flee the country that aren't documented, that aren't registered, that aren't part of this number. But what it says is there's 3,664 more people leaving China to go to North Korea than North Koreans going to China. So what's going on there is China and North Korea historically have had a very close relationship with each other. This goes back to the Korean War when they took the same side as each other. You also see that North Korea shares a border with China. So for these various reasons, there's some connections here. So when North Korea kind of goes crazy, when they say, well, we're going to drop a nuclear bomb and we're really going to show up the world, that's where we say, China, take care of your drunk friend at the bar. China, okay, you've got a relationship with North Korea. You need to figure it out. You need to straighten it out. They're your neighbor. They're your buddy. So that's one of the things, look at geopolitically. China has a lot of, big role in what happens with North Korea going forward. And we look at, in terms of migration flow, this is the only country in which people are going to North Korea. Very isolationist, very restricted. Now let's try to understand, okay, wait a minute. There are places in which North Koreans are leaving North Korea and they're going to. And so Kazakhstan has a positive net migration with North Korea. What that means is 6,000 more 6,000 more North Koreans are going to Kazakhstan than Kazakhstan people going to North Korea. So what's happening there is also kind of related to relationship with communist North Korea. So just like how China is communist and North Korea is basically communist, it says they're democratic, but they're communist historically. You look at the Soviet Union, and in particular Kazakhstan was historically communist. Now, not anymore. We already learned in Central Asia that the Soviet Union is no longer. But a former Soviet republic, Kazakhstan, was an area in which North Koreans, from the Korean War to the Cold War, so the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on, have slowly been migrating to Kazakhstan, North Koreans. And so what you have is essentially chain migration, in which relatives are just reconnecting with previous North Koreans who migrated during the communist era, when communism dominated half of the world, who migrated to Kazakhstan for various reasons. And so we're still seeing that continued migration, but very, very, very minimal when we think about the migration flows that are occurring across the world. That's not that much of a migration stream. Finally, the only other country. And so what we can do is when you're answering this question, if this is a question you want to answer as far as, okay, well, what's going on migration-wise, in terms of your country and flows, record the data. And so the data is already recorded here. This is pretty up to date. I believe it's 2015 data. So record the data. So what that means is, once again, 6,002 more North Koreans are leaving to go to Kazakhstan than Kazakhstan people going to North Korea. Finally, United Kingdom, we see about 2,681 more North Koreans are migrating to. And what's going on there is refugees. So in the United Kingdom, kind of similar to the United States, they have a role in which they take in refugees. In the case of North Korea, we're going to be very sympathetic. In the case of the British, very sympathetic because of just the brutal dictatorships they've had, the small short men, the short guys complexes that they've had rule their country over the years. So we were very sympathetic to it. So that's essentially the quick 411 on North Korea migration patterns. Not a lot going on here. Now let's look at some flow patterns for the other countries of East Asia. And just to kind of go back to refresh, you can either hit the refresh button or just kind of hit tap somewhere out into a sea, middle of emptiness. So let's just look at some patterns. So let's start off. Let's go to South Korea. North Korea is a neighbor to the south, obviously. So here we see a lot of in-migration. So if you had a country which has a lot of in-migration, in the case of South Korea, as we showed in the tables, it's had a sudden increase in migration. You should tell me about it. You should explain the reasons why. And simple Google search will help you with that. So what we see is a lot of inflow in terms of different countries in Southeast Asia, Philippines, Vietnam. You see a lot of these countries, these stage 2, stage 3 countries, kind of in the periphery here in Asia, sending migrants to South Korea. Overwhelmingly China. Look at China, 249,000 net migration in terms of going to South Korea, but also Japan as well. So you see particular patterns of in-migration, very scattered, very dispersed, all throughout much of Asia, but also nearby countries as well. Some other interesting patterns I see here. So the kind of, you can see the rapid fire, these dots going all over the place. The rapid fire you can see from Uzbekistan to Korea, you can see its pattern here. So Uzbekistan to South Korea, you can see as far as those dots going there. What's going on there? And this is where you do simple research. And so all I did was Uzbekistan, South Korea, migration, and I came across an article here. And that article talks about how Uzbekis, the people from Uzbekistan, historically, or Uzbeks, I guess, they historically would go to Russia. That was their big, that's their their nearest regional power. They were a former Soviet republic, and that makes a lot of sense. They're very well connected to Russia. However, Russia has kind of had some struggling economy, kind of this rough economic times in the last few years, and so they're finding other places to find jobs. In Central Asia, not a lot of jobs. Central Asia, there's not a lot of reasons for people to stick around, especially young people. If anything, we've seen this is one part of the world in which they have de-urbanization. People leaving cities because there's no more jobs there, no more factories. The factories are no longer. So in the case of South Korea, going back to the map here, in the case of South Korea, it has jobs. It's industrializing. Further, you can work, you can go to Kazakhstan, you can go to China and work in the fields. In the case of South Korea, you can get yourself a factory job. Factory jobs are much stabler incomes, much higher incomes, and so you can understand why, in the case of Uzbekistan, you see this out-migration. In the case of South Korea, as we're going to learn here in the text, is it definitely a place in which they are seeking in-migration. So this is the in-migration part of this, of the story for South Korea. What about some out-migration? So we can see what are some places in which there's a blue dot. So let's look at the different ones and start trying to look at where do we see the biggest rates. And so once again, we're going to record data. So 17,000 out-migration, net migration rate to Australia. So what that means is 17,000 more people are going to Australia than Australia to South Korea. So unlike those other countries, so essentially what's going on here is if you're a well-developed stage 4 country, why would you go to a newly developed stage, a newly industrializing recent stage 4 country? You already got your act together. You already got jobs available. And so that's what's happening in the case of Australia. You also have the role of Australia. This is something I'll cover in a later chapter, but Australia is definitely a global regional power along with Korea and China. It's kind of a multi power, East Asia combined with Australia and Oceania and a little bit of Singapore, in which you got multiple countries that have a lot of power in this region. You go to Europe, it's the Germans, the British. You go to Northern America, of course, it's overwhelmingly the United States. Here in East Asia, in this part of the world, it's a few different countries that have power. So you look at Australia, there are a lot of in-migration to Australia. We also see a large migration to the United States. A lot of that has its legacy, once again, with the Korean War. So the Korean War, the South Koreans were on the United States side. And so once again, there's a relationship there. And then you have various waves of Korean migration to the United States since World War II, which I'll explain in the text. Other patterns you see, Mexico and Canada, Brazil. So any of these other newly industrializing countries, kind of similar to South Korea, you also see a migration stream. Now, in the case of South Korea, knowing a little bit more about it, it's one of its chief industries, one of its chief exports is cars. And so you see, some migration is going to, establish car operations in new countries. And so maybe in Brazil, Mexico, these newly industrializing countries in which, these companies like Daewoo, Hyundai, Kia, these South Korean companies are opening up facilities in these other newly industrializing countries where there's higher skills but also some cheaper labor. Now let's look at some patterns for China. So go ahead and click on China's dot. We can see a lot of blue dots. So that means there's a lot of out-migration to a variety of countries in China which are leaving from China. So you see some neighboring countries. So the overseas Chinese was something I introduced in the Southeast Asian chapter. There's no doubt that we still see the overseas Chinese. So there's been a historical migration of Chinese to Southeast Asia and other East Asian countries. But with globalization, with advancements in transportation, information, communication, technology, it's now a much more dispersed pattern. So there's some global things occurring, but also at the local level in China. In the last 20 to 30 years, they've been more open to allowing people to migrate out of the country. So what we see as far as different patterns, we see a dispersed pattern, but we can also see different size blue dots, which indicate different levels of out-migration. So South Korea, it's negative 249,000. So what that means is big out-migration, negative net migration rate to South Korea. In the case of the United States, and it's the biggest out-migration. So it's once again speaks to advancements in transportation. It's not the nearest neighbors that actually are the number one source area for out-migrants in China. It's actually across the Pacific Ocean, or I guess across the rest of the world if you're going the other direction, like this flow is to the United States. So China is up there with Mexico in terms of the key source areas for a lot of migrants to the United States. And there's other patterns here in Europe. You can go and click and look at particular patterns in Canada and all of that. Now let's look at some places, some red dots. And so we see India, we see Burma to a certain extent, we see Brazil. So there is some in-migration to China. There is definitely from neighboring countries. We see Japan, very steady in-migration from Japan, Philippines, and so on. And so this is where we try to figure out, okay, well, what's going on there? Why is it the Japanese are moving to China? And so what's going on there is there's a lot of Japanese businesses, a lot of companies that are opening up shop in China, so it makes sense. You're going to see an in-migration there as well. Finally, let's look at some migration flows for Japan. So we see some inflows. Once again, these are going to be some more likely to be neighboring countries. So you see Vietnam, a little bit of Thailand, a little bit of Indonesia, in which you see in-migration from those Southeast Asian countries. But you do see, for the most part, more out-migration, more flows. And so it's going to nearby China and South Korea. Once again, those are for industrialization, economic opportunity. Also in Europe. So we think, well, where's Japan known for? They're known for cars. Well, what are they known for in Germany? They're known for cars. So you see also this connection between stage 4, highly developed countries. You're going to see a lot of migration back and forth between those countries, and that's largely for business related. But in the case of Japan, the interesting one, if you're looking at this, you kind of think, well, what the hell, is Brazil. And if you know anything about Brazil, it actually, of all the countries in the world, it's not Japan, it has the largest Japanese population. So going back to throughout much of the 1900s, so about 1910, 1915 to most of the 1900s, let's go up to the 1990s, there was a large out-migration of Japanese to Brazil. So you had this tradition that started and then just kept up throughout much of the 20th century. So what it was is a lot of rural Japanese in the early 20th century who were poor, impoverished, who didn't feel like they had economic opportunity, they didn't have any hope. And so what do? They moved. And they moved to Brazil where there was some opportunities. And so I'll explain more, a little bit more nuance in the text, but this is just some interesting flows. And so when you have these world migration map patterns, and you got random countries that you're going to come across, try to look for the anomalies. Try to look at the ones that are odd, the ones that are these flows that aren't from to and from a nearby country. That's often some stuff in which you got some juiciness we can talk about. So in the case of Japan, that out-migration historically to Brazil is It's very interesting.